So as you get the opportunity, please do fill it out. I'll give out a few extra forms. You guys got your forms? There's a new one. Anybody else want one? You guys want one? Yeah, you got that look like I definitely want. Okay, great. Okay, so we have the Bible to study, and the reason we study it is because it's meaningful to us. It applies to us, and the Lord gave it to us so that we would understand how it applies to our lives and how it applies to the lives of those around us, and that we could not only understand what God intends for us, but also help others understand it as well. And so it's not just understanding it and being saved, but it's also, we remember looking in James, it's also about works for the Lord, not works for salvation, but works for doing what the Lord wants us to do. He wants us to share the gospel. He wants us to be faithful and righteous in the way that we live. And there's lots and lots of good examples there that tell us what all that means. And in the Psalms, what we've seen so far is there's many situations that David and Asaph and others have been in. And in those situations, they are describing how they feel, how they seek the Lord's help, and ultimately how they are able to triumph or overcome that situation with the Lord's help. And so that's pretty much the message of the Psalms. We haven't had everybody sing the Psalms. That was something, I know Brother Mike probably thought about it. I thought about it a little bit, not as much as he did probably, but that's how they were originally presented, were songs. And some of them are actually written to songs. There's the Psalms Project, I think, Sister Mackenzie, I think you were talking about that, where they're putting all the Psalms to music. And so if you want to listen to that, it is available out there. And there's other people that have written songs. Some of the songs I didn't, not the Psalms Project, but some of the other ones that have written songs, I was like, I'm not so sure that's what I really want to listen. So you have to kind of decide for yourself whether you like it or you don't like it. But the measure always is, does it point to the Lord, right? So if you listen to it and it helps you focus on the Lord and helps you focus on your service or your situation and how it relates to the Lord, great. If it's really distracting and annoying, you probably don't want to spend much more time on those. So. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a great point, because the Hebrew, and I've forgotten, I read it, but I forgot it said, but it talked about how many words were on each line and all of that, almost like poetry, or certain kinds of poetry. So it actually is quite clever, I guess you would say, on how they were written. Some of them, I think, were even acrostics, which the first letter of each word of each line also meant something. And so, uh, hmm? Yes. So that was kind of lost on me, honestly. I mean, it's good to know and be aware that that was all in there. But I guess the most important thing for me is that the Lord put it there for us to understand and apply to our lives. And these were, because they were songs, they were in front of the Hebrews all the time. And it wasn't just a year or two or three or whatever. What do we talk about, the period of time during which these were written? Do you remember that? How how much time span? 1,000 years, yeah. 1,000 years. Is there any song that you know of that you sing that's 1,000-year-old song? Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think it probably is, and it's at least 100 years old, if not older than that. Uh, but the fact that the Hebrews were singing these for, well, 1,000 years was the period of time they were created. But they've been singing them since then. They didn't stop singing them just because it's not biblical times anymore. So, all things to consider. So we do have several to cover today, 52 through 56. Fortunately, we don't have a lot of verses on each one. So it's going to be a little bit easier to get through it all. So if somebody would like to read Psalm 52, and please remember also the part that's just right above the number that kind of gives the context of the psalm. If someone could read that, that would be great. Thank you, Sister Kinsey. So, as with all of these Psalms, you need to know the context of what's happening. It's jumping into the middle of a situation or a story, in this case, that David is in. And so if we go look at the background, we better understand what David is talking about. So for this one, we have to go to 1 Samuel chapter 21. In that chapter, we're going to see that this was a pivotal point in David's life, and it kind of reminded me, David had a lot of pivotal points in his life, and for many of those, we actually have studies in the Bible about it. So this is one of those times. David and Jonathan, Saul's son, were best friends, and they were serving Saul, and Saul had changed his perspective about David. He had become jealous with David, and in fact, he had even thrown a spear at him a couple of times. And so David got clarification from Jonathan. Was he just imagining this, or was this really real? And he said, yeah, this is really real. My father's trying to kill you. And so David fled to the priest Ahimelech for help. And what we see in these verses in 1 Samuel 21 is that Doeg, I may not be spelling that right, but that's how I'm going to pronounce it. The Edomite saw David with Ahimelech, and he ended up telling Saul. And so we're going to see a little bit about what happened there. So in 1 Samuel 21 and verse 1, then came David to Nob, to Ahimelech the priest, and Ahimelech was afraid at the meeting of David, and said unto him, why art thou alone, and no man with thee? And David said unto Ahimelech the priest, the king hath commanded me a business, and has said unto me, let no man know anything of the business whereabout I send thee, and what I have commanded thee, and I have appointed my servants to such and such a place. Now therefore, what is under thine hand? Give me 5 loaves of bread in mine hand, or what there is present. So Ahimelech is kind of wondering what's going on, because no one that was in the king's court usually went by themselves. They always went with some servants, and they were going on some mission. So it was unusual for David to be by himself. And it was curious, he didn't really seem to have any supplies or anything with him. And so the priest gave him some bread. And then if you go down to verse 7, it's 1 Samuel 21:7. Now a certain man of the servants of Saul was there that day, detained before the Lord, and his name was Doeg, an Edomite, the chiefest of the herdmen that belonged to Saul. And David said unto Ahimelech, And is there not here under thine hand spear or sword? For I have neither brought my sword nor my weapons with me, because the king's business required haste. And the priest said, The sword of Goliath the Philistine, whom thou slewest in the valley of Elah, behold, it is here wrapped in a cloth behind the ephod. If thou wilt take it, for there is no other save that here. And David said, There is none like that, give it to me. And David arose and fled that day for fear of Saul, and went to Achish, the king of Gath. And we'll see some more about that in another psalm. Then if we jump over to 1 Psalm in 22, chapter 22 and verse 1, it says, David therefore departed thence and escaped to the cave Adullam. And when his brethren and all his father's house heard it, they went down thither to him. And every one that was in distress, and every one that was in debt, and every one that was discontented gathered themselves unto him. And he became captain over them, and there were about him 400 men. And David went thence to Mizpah of Moab, and he said unto the king of Moab, Let my father and my mother, I pray thee, come forth and be with you, till I know what God will do for me. And he brought them before the king of Moab, and they dwelt with him all the while David was in the hold. And the prophet Gad said unto David, Abide not in the hold, depart and get thee in the land of Judah. Then David departed and came into the forest of Hereth. And I'm just realizing those 5 verses, I forgot to mark not to read those. Just skip over those. They're applicable, but not as applicable as the ones I'm just going to read right now. When Saul heard that David was discovered, and the men that were with him, now Saul abode in Gibeah under a tree in Ramah, having a spear in his hand, and all his servants were standing about him. Then Saul said unto his servants that stood about him, Hear now, ye Benjamites, will the son of Jesse give every one of you fields and vineyards, and make you all captains of thousands and captains of hundreds? That all of you have conspired against me, and there is none that showed me that my son hath made a league with the son of Jesse, and there is none of you that is sorry for me, or showeth unto me that my son hath stirred up my servant against me to lie in wait, as at this day. Then answered Doeg the Edomite, which was set over the servants of Saul, and said, I saw the son of Jesse coming to Nob, to Ahimelech, the son of Ahitub, and he inquired of the Lord for him, and gave him victuals, and gave him the sword of Goliath the Philistine. Then the king sent to call Ahimelech the priest, the son of Ahitub, and all his father's house, the priests that were in Nob, and they came all of them to the king. Okay, now I remember to skip 12 through 14, or 15, so we're going to skip those and go to the next one. And the king said, Thou shalt surely die, Ahimelech, thou and thy father's house, all thy father's house. And the king said unto the footmen that stood about him, Turn and slay the priests of the Lord, because their hand also is with David, and because they knew when he fled, and did not show it to me. But the servants of the king would not put forth their hand to fall upon the priests of the Lord. And the king said to Doeg, Turn thou and fall upon the priests. And Doeg the Edomite turned, and he fell upon the priests, and slew on that day 75 persons that did wear a linen ephod. And Nob, the city of the priests, smote he with the edge of the sword both men and women, children and sucklings, and oxen and asses and sheep, with the edge of the sword. So this is the situation that David is talking about in the psalm. he is grieving over what's happened with Ahimelech and his, basically all the priests that were there were blamed for helping him. And so that's what he's talking about here. Doeg was an opportunist. He wanted Saul to think of him favorably. Not only did he tell Saul where David was, but he killed all those people. In Psalm 52:1, David is calling Doeg a mighty man with a question mark. So how mighty do you have to be to kill unarmed people? These are priests. These are Levites. They were serving the Lord by making the sacrifices, by taking care of the temple, by all of those things. They were not warriors. In fact, they were the exact opposite. They were the ones who were identified out of all the tribes that they were not to be warriors. So when David says mighty man with a question mark, it's like, how hard is it to kill women and children and priests? There's no accomplishment there. He did follow the orders of the king. In this case, is the Lord blessing Saul with what's happened here? Not at all. You could tell the people didn't like it. Even his own footmen didn't want to do it. And they knew that the penalty of not carrying out a king's commandment could be death. And so they recognized that it was wicked to kill the priest. So this situation happened, and one of the sons of Ahimelech, this is in verse 20, the son of Ahitub named Abiathar escaped and fled after David. And Abiathar showed David that Saul had slain the Lord's priest. And David said unto Abiathar, I knew it that day when Doeg the Edomite was there, that he would surely tell Saul, I have occasioned the death of all the persons of thy father's house. Abide thou with me, fear not, for he that seeketh my life seeketh thy life, but with me thou shalt be in safeguard. So in this whole psalm that we read here, he's talking about people that are, even though they're doing the will of the king, that they're wicked. That's what he's talking about. So you can be anywhere, at any place, at any time. You can be in a church, and you can still do wicked things. And so what this is saying is, not only were the works that he committed wicked, but is even more wicked than all of that. Thy tongue deviseth mischief like a sharp razor, working deceitfully. Thou lovest evil more than good, and lying rather than to speak righteousness. Thou loveth all devouring words, O thou deceitful tongue. God shall likewise destroy thee forever. So he's saying Doeg's not going to be blessed. He did the commandment of the king, but it wasn't right, and he knew it wasn't right, and he did it anyway to get favor from the king. And so he was an opportunist, as I mentioned, because he wanted to get recognition and gain from it. And here in verse 6, the righteous also shall see and fear, and shall laugh at him. Lo, this is the man that made not God his strength, but trusteth in the abundance of his riches, and strengthened himself in his wickedness. So he's making a contrast between Doeg and what he's doing and his motivations, and David's own motivations. In verse 8, but I am like a green olive tree in the house of God, which he's talking there when he says he's like an olive tree. An olive tree is a symbol of stability and prosperity. I trust in the mercy of God forever and ever. I will praise thee forever because thou hast done it, and I will wait on thy name, for it is good before the saints. So here again, David, and there's so many occurrences, can't even count the number. You probably could if you wanted to, but there's so many it's hard to count, where David is pointing again to the Lord. And so here's a situation where someone is following the king's commandments. As a citizen, he's doing the right thing of what he's commanded to do. But all in all, it is wickedness. And David is saying, I will fight against this, not with my own strength, but the strength of the Lord. And so this whole psalm is an acknowledgement that situations like these happen, not this exact situation, but situations like it. And as we see situations like this in our own lives, where we see people that are aligned against us, wicked people that are trying to do wicked things, either against us or against God's people, that it really is an expectation for us to rely and trust on the Lord. That's really the bottom line of this whole thing, is trusting the Lord, praying to the Lord, seeking His wisdom, seeking His assistance, His mercy. And when we do that, we've got the right focus. We've got the right way of dealing with the situation. And even though Doeg here probably got some reward from Saul, it doesn't mention anything about it here. But for the moment, he was successful and he got more riches and all that. But he's going to face the judgment for what happened. Maybe he already did face the judgment. Anyway, that's what David is telling us there. I did way too much talking on that one. I gotta let that happen on the other ones. Okay. All right. So 53, would somebody like to read that one? That's only 6. That might be one of the shortest ones we've seen so far. Thank you, Sister Doris. So what is this psalm talking about? Mm-hmm. And you ever run into people like that? You ever have somebody tell you, I don't believe in God, or I'm an atheist, or whatever? There are people that will say that, and here in this first verse it says, the fool has said in his heart there is no God. So here it is, David and God saying that person is foolish. Mm-hmm. Right. And what does that tell you when you see it more than once? It's important, right? You see things that come up all the time. Like, remember in James, be patient? At the beginning and at the end said be patient. There's other verses in the Bible that say be patient, but those are a couple of places. But it shows up often enough that the Lord's trying to tell us we need to be patient. And so in this case, he's saying, the foolish say there is no God. Corrupt are they and have done abominable iniquity. There is none that doeth good. And this is one of the things that I just don't understand. By the way, and the differences between what we see here in 53, Psalm 53 and Psalm 14, which is about the same, is that the names of God are a little bit different. In Psalm 14, they use the word the Lord in most verses. And here in Psalm 53, Yahweh points to a covenant relationship, and Elohim points to power. So remember when we talked about before of going from sort of a book of Genesis alignment for the first part of the Psalms, and then the second part of the Psalms were aligned to Exodus. So this is a different perspective on God. So even though most of the words are the same, the thought about God is a little bit different. Not that it's a different God or anything like that, but different aspects of God. When we think about someone that's foolish, can you think of anybody in the Bible that seemed like they were pretty foolish, somebody that we studied about? Saul, yeah, Saul was foolish. Saul tried to do it all on his own abilities, and he knew that God was blessing David. He knew that for sure. But he still opposed David anyway, because he didn't want to be bothered by David and what he was doing, and people recognizing that he was serving the Lord even better than he was. One of the fools from the Bible, I remember Nabal. Does anybody remember that whole story and what happened there? You want to tell us about that? Mm-hmm. Yeah, he even ridiculed some of his men, didn't he? Didn't he like shave half of their beard and do some other things, took all their clothes, that kind of thing? And David was ready to pretty much kill all of them. And so what happened in that case? Abigail. Again, a wife saves their husband, in this case temporarily, but she saved all the people. So she realized what had happened and knew how serious it was, and she grabbed all kinds of provisions, and she raced out to meet David and his men and to say, we do not all stand with Nabal, and here's all these provisions and all that, and please stay your hand against all of us. And so David said, okay. And then Abigail went back, and Nabal was, I guess, drinking and having a celebration and all that. And I think it wasn't until the next morning that she told him what happened. And then he, if in our terminology today, had it, and basically wasn't able to speak or anything. He was pretty much mobilized, and then he died a few days later. Then what happened after that? Yeah, that's right. He married her. So when we think about a foolish man, we think about Nabal, who was completely oblivious to what David and his men had been doing for him. Whether he was aware or not, it doesn't really say, but he never acknowledged it or respected it. And it was to the point where he ended up dying over it for his lack of recognition for the help that he was receiving. And this started out by saying, the fool has said in his heart, there is no God. When I look around, I pray on the way to work most days, and I just look at the sky, and usually the sun is coming up, and I see all that, and I see everything, whether it's raining or lightning or whatever it is. And I just thank the Lord for all the things that He created. Sometimes I see things I see, and sometimes things that I don't see. But I went to an engineering school. Things don't just magically appear out of nowhere. The things like airplanes. Airplanes that we ride on sometimes, or that our armed forces ride in. Those were engineered by somebody, and those are so much less complicated and sophisticated than we are as a human being, and not realizing that we have a creator just seems completely illogical to me. Mhm. I don't know how you can. That all just happened accidentally. It, it makes no sense to me at all. I've never done anything great accidentally. Accidentally create something, or accidentally do something remarkable. Uh, mhm. Right. So if someone is foolish enough to deny that God exists, then hear what he's saying. Corrupt are they, and have done a abominable iniquity. There is none that doeth good. Because if you don't recognize that there's a God, then what did you do? You just made yourself the God. And so, and if you worship yourself, there's going to be one day coming in your life where you're going to die. And it could be on that day that you realize, maybe I'm not God after all. Hopefully you realize it before then, but if you don't, you're probably going to realize it on that day. So, for those that deny that God exists, I think it's an excuse to say, hey, whatever I want to do is just fine. There's no right and wrong. You need to be permissive to everybody, and however everybody wants to do everything all the time, and it's okay, and there's no problem with it, and all that stuff. I hear that a lot. But fundamental to all of it is they're denying that there's a righteous way for us to live, and there's a wicked way for us to live. You don't see people saying, hey, I know this is wicked, but I'm going to do it anyway. You don't see people saying that. What they say is, oh, there's nothing wrong with that. Yeah, it's just fine. Maybe you don't believe the same thing I believe in, but, we should all get along, coexist and all those sorts of things. Sometimes you see a car with like 25 bumper stickers on there, and they're all saying about that same thing. And what's interesting is they're saying, yeah, you should be tolerant. But are those people tolerant? They're not tolerant at all. If you say, well, my Bible says what you're saying is wicked, there's not going to be too much tolerance in your reaction to that. I would say they're going to have a strong negative reaction to that, because the word that we have here, the righteous words in the Bible, came from God, and it convicts people. You can be a wicked person and be convicted. You could be a wicked person full well knowing it's wrong and do it anyway. Hmm. Yeah, and it's a pretty good percentage of the population too. It's not a handful of people. It might be half the people. Don't know how many it is, but it's a lot because it takes away their freedom. And what you see after that, after the acceptance of that by so many, then what's the next thing that's accepted? It's evil also. Things that were formerly thought as evil, now it's okay. So it's a never-ending thing where our society, our civilization just continues to get more and more wicked because they're relying on themselves. Hmm. Hmm. Right. And trading all of that God has to offer for money, right? Somebody pays me, like Doeg here that we read about. He was doing it for money. He was a wicked person, but he was doing it for money and recognition from the king in that case. And we have people that are the same today. Okay, so we're going to go through 56. We're going to skip a couple. We're not going to get to all of it. If somebody would like to read 56, which is the focus of our quarterly for today. Thank you, Brother Homer. So this whole psalm is about fear in the midst of trials. And have you ever been afraid before? You ever had one of those dreams where somebody's trying to kill you? And you're just like an inch away from being killed, and then you suddenly wake up, you're sweat and everything else. You're like, what happened? What happened? And you feel like you didn't even sleep that night. So David's life had changed. So David was part of the king's court. Since he had killed Goliath, things had gone well for him. But now, because of the jealousy of Saul, Saul tried to kill him. And because he realized if he stayed there, he was going to get killed. So he left. And then the king put the word out, hey, tell me where David is. It doesn't say whether he put rewards out or not, but it seems like he probably did. He made it pretty obvious that he was looking for David as a criminal. And so you had the whole country looking for David. That's a lot of people. Right, if you helped them, yeah. So it used to be they'd put your picture in the post office and you'd be on the wanted posters and all that stuff. I guess they may still do that, but what they started doing is putting you on TV, some of the different shows that are there. Here's this person, here's what they did. If you see them or know anything about it, please call us. And, a television, that reaches a lot of people. And so there's been people that have been hidden for years and years that were found because they saw something on a TV show. It might have even been in Mexico, and they found him. They said, oh yeah, that guy lives right over here, and come and get him. So David is facing the fact that everybody in his country, his home country, is potentially looking for him ultimately so Saul can kill him. David hadn't been on the run before because there really wasn't any reason. He was a righteous man. He was afraid of Saul so much that he fled to the Philistines. The Philistines were the ones the Hebrews going against the whole entire time, right? Going against the Hebrews. So here's David. Well, the Philistines know who David is, especially in Gath. That's where Goliath was from. And remember, he had Goliath's sword with him. So if you didn't recognize David, you probably recognized Goliath's sword. So here's David seeing that he's in so much danger and he's so afraid, he's actually going willingly to Gath to try to find a place to hide and to rest. Well, it doesn't work very well. King Achish and the people there figured out pretty quickly. And so what David did, and I won't read the verses, but he started acting like he was crazy. He started slobbering on himself and acting strange and weird and all that stuff, scratching on things. And so there was no honor in killing him when he looked like he was crazy and lost his mind or something. So the king was trying to figure out what to do with him. And so that's the situation that David is in here. And so David is talking about all of the enemies that are out there, people that are trying to find him every single day. It's not like, oh yeah, if you see him, let us know. I mean, today we would call them bounty hunters, right? People that were actively seeking, trying to find him. And there were people that were doing that every single day. And when you look at a graphic of all the places where David had been, I mean, he was in a lot of different places. And a lot of times he left just in time before somebody got there. And at least one time Saul was there in the same exact cave he was in, and he cut a piece off of his robe to show him that he had been there and had the opportunity to kill him, but he didn't. But David was on the run, and he was on the run every single day. It wasn't we're going to go here and rest a month and then go from there. No, it wasn't anything like that. He was afraid for his life, and the whole entire time he's trusting in the Lord. So he talks about all the things that are happening. And then verse 3, what time I am afraid, I will trust in thee. In God I will praise his word. In God will I put my trust. I will not fear what flesh can do unto me. Every day they wrest my words. All their thoughts are against me for evil. And so what he's talking about here in another verses is that people are hearing what David is saying and they're twisting his words, making it sound like he's treasonous, that he's against the king, that he's done things against the country, and they're reporting that back to Saul. and the other people that are trying to find Saul, which is giving him even more motivation to try to find him. So he's got a lot of people that are against him, that are trying to find him. They gather themselves together, they hide themselves, they mark my steps when they wait for my soul. Shall they escape by iniquity? In thine anger cast down the people, O God. So the one thing that David isn't shy about, he's not saying, protect me, Lord, and get me away from these people. He's saying, go kill these people that are trying to get me. He's saying what he wants the Lord to do, if it's the Lord's will to do it. And he's wishing on that the Lord will put obstacles and barriers in their way, and that he will bless him and give him the grace and not give it to them. In verse 9, when I cry unto thee, then shall mine enemies turn back. For this I know, for God is for me. In God will I praise his word, and the Lord will I praise his word. In God have I put my trust, I will not be afraid what man can do to me. Thy vows are upon me, O God, I will render praises unto thee. So, as we see conflict in our life, and as we see situations where people are coming up against us, the very natural thing to do is to fight directly against that person. Whether somebody's arguing against us, or they're making false accusations against us, the very first thing that's natural for us to do is to respond right back to that person. And what David is saying here is that's all coming onto us. We should seek his strength and his intervention in those situations and let him take care of it. Mm-hmm. 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 And the times we're studying, we're just like a month or two, right, that David was running. This is years and years of his life where his faith is being tested. And so we may think we have it bad. We probably don't have it as bad as David did. Thanks, everybody.